So welcome everyone, and I appreciate everybody being here today with Senator Cream and myself and all of you who have worked throughout 2020 to bring safe and fair elections to Massachusetts. And as everyone knows, it went extremely well, and it provided many options for voters throughout the Commonwealth. As you know, we had a plan back in April for what we did not know would be like in September and November in terms of the pandemic and how people would be able to voice their vote. So that went extremely well, and I think it's something that is here to stay. And so with my colleagues who are all here today, I know it's Senator Cream and all of you working on this bill so that we can provide as many options and accessible vote by mail options for voters in Massachusetts. So again, I just welcome all my colleagues and all the staff I know that are on the call today. Today's briefing is going to focus on hearing directly from Peg Pearl, who is the Director of Elections from Arapahoe County, on many items in the VOTES Act that are already being used in Colorado to much success. So after the elections last fall, we know we still had work to do here in Massachusetts to make our elections more secure, more accessible, and more equitable. So Senator Cream and I, and working with all our partners and you in the legislature, our colleagues, we filed this election modernization, the VOTES Act, which is a roadmap for the 21st century democracy in Massachusetts that works for voters across the Commonwealth. The VOTES Act builds on the work in the legislature last year to expand the many voting opportunities during the pandemic. But we know that these reforms should have a permanent place in our law. So I look forward to working with all of you on this, and I want to just hand it over to Senator Cream at this point.
Thank you, Representative Lawn. So, and thank you all for attending this briefing on the VOTES Act. I'm proud to have sponsored it with my good friend, Representative John Lawn, and more than 100 of my colleagues in the legislature. And welcome to the new chair of election laws. I'm glad to see that he's here and on board. So it's great to be working with all the legislators as well as the Election Modernization Coalition. Together, we've crafted comprehensive legislation to expand and increase voter participation and modernize our election registration system. As you will hear shortly, the key provisions of which are already implemented and working successfully in Colorado. At this time in our country's history, we know now more than ever how expanded voting participation is critical to ensuring that all voices are heard in our democracy. After everything our country went through last fall, with red states increasingly looking to suppress voter turnout, this is the time for Massachusetts to be a leader with Colorado. This is the time for the Commonwealth to consider and enact these bold measures to protect our democracy. The VOTES Act will make voting by mail and early in-person voting options permanent, and it will make same-day voter registration the law of the land. The VOTES Act will ensure that anyone who is incarcerated in jail or prison and who is otherwise eligible to vote under current law is able to do so. Voting is a way of participating and feeling part of a community and can play a vital and important role in successful reentry from prison. And the VOTES Act will ensure that our votes are secure and recorded accurately, and that our voter registration system is also accurate and up to date by adopting new risk-limiting audit standards and participating in the ERIC program with other states. These reforms will make our voting system stronger, more secure, more equitable, and the reforms are needed now, right now. So again, I want to thank all the sponsors and members of the coalition for their work, their passion, and all of you that participated in that forum. And I pass this off to Jeff Foster from Common Cause Massachusetts to introduce other members of the Election Modernization Coalition and our speakers. So thanks for all of you for coming, and thanks for having us.
Majority Leader, Chair Lawn, thank you so much, not just for joining us today, but really for your vision with the Votes Act. It's very, very popular. So this event is also being sponsored by the Election Modernization Coalition, and we just want to go around real quick for all the members and staff and have our partners introduce themselves. I believe we know the order we're going to go in, so why don't we start with our friends at the ACLU.
Hi, everybody. This is Gavi Wolf at the ACLU of Massachusetts. And I just wanted to recognize and acknowledge that have been joined since the original introductions by Rep. Howard from Chelmsford and Lowell. I'm really glad you're here. I also wanted to just thank all of the staff for being here because obviously you all have a huge role to play in your offices. And as members of the coalition, we're here to be resources to you and make sure you have all the information you need to, as this legislation moves forward.
Thank you so much, Gavi. Anyone else from the team? Great. Well, again, I'm Jeff Foster. I'm the new Executive Director at Common Cause Massachusetts. And I'm joined by my colleague, Christina. Whoop.
Hi, all. I'm Christina. I'm the Assistant Director at Common Cause Massachusetts, and it's great to be here.
And Pam Wilmot, ED and VP of States at Common Cause.
And David Sullivan from the Common Cause Board. And I just wanted to acknowledge Jacqueline Hubbard from Senator Feingold's office, who I'm happy to see is here because he's the Senate Chair of our committee.
Oh. Okay. Yeah.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sophia Hall. I'm from Lawyers for Civil Rights, trying to make sure the whole Common Cause team got in there. Good afternoon, everyone. Excited to be here. Really excited to the future and what election modernization can look like in Massachusetts. This is such an incredibly important civil rights issue. And as we have so many times in the past, I look forward to Massachusetts creating a blueprint for the future.
Good afternoon, everybody. This is Patty Comfort, the Executive Director of the League of Women Voters of Massachusetts. And I'm joined by my colleagues, Nancy Brumbach and Linda Friedman, who are our election law specialists and have been doing this for a very long time. So we are very excited to be here and looking forward to moving this bill through quickly.
Hi, I'm Janet Dominitz. I'm the director of the Massachusetts Public Interest Research Group, MassPIRG, and thanks to everybody for being here today.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Cheryl Clyburn Crawford, the Executive Director at Mass Vote. And I too am excited to be here and thank you for making the space for us to have this conversation. And I am joined by my colleague, Alex Salaskis.
I'm Alex Salakis, and I'm the Policy and Communications Manager at Mass Vote. It's nice to meet you all.
And good afternoon. My name is Beth Wong, and I'm the director of the Massachusetts Voter Table, a coalition of community-based organizations dedicated to increasing civic engagement and civic participation. The Votes Act will go a long way to ensuring that everyone who wants to vote can vote, and everyone who can vote does vote. So thank you for your time and your interest in the Votes Act.
Well, thank you so much to the EMC team. Really appreciate partnership with you all. I also just want to recognize Rep. Giannino joined. Rep, thanks so much for being here. And also, Gavi, thank you. Want to give a huge shout out to Rep. Howard. I am a Lowellian and very happy to now have our city represented by you. So excited to work with you. Without any further ado, it's my privilege to introduce our primary speaker today. And so as was mentioned on the outset, the Votes Act has many provisions in it that Colorado has already been doing, and they've been doing it really well. And so we thought it would be a great help to you all as you consider legislation this session to hear from other states that have been doing some of these things well, and to give you some time to ask questions or raise some opinions with a true expert who not only worked for a very long time in the advocacy world for election voting rights, but now as an administrator. So real quick, I'm going to put in the chat an agenda for the discussion that'll help guide the conversation. And it'll allow you to follow along and anticipate when we're going to hit key items that you might be particularly curious about. And so what you'll see in this agenda is that Director Pearl is going to cover a few items, including mail-in voting and early voting, same-day registration, risk limiting audits, and more. But after each few minutes, 2 to 3 minutes on each item, we're going to pause for some Q&A for 2 or 3 minutes of Q&A on this. So feel free, as Peg's hitting some items, to be ready with your questions. And then at the very end, we have about 15 minutes for just general Q&A. And there are members from our team that are going to help facilitate that process as well. So without any further ado, it is my privilege to introduce Peg Pearl, who's the Director of Elections for Arapahoe County, Colorado. Peg came to this position in January 2020 with almost 20 years of experience in election administration and voting rights, money in politics, government ethics, and open records at the national, state, and local level. Peg helped design and enact Colorado's modern voting laws, plus state and city campaign disclosure reforms, while serving as senior counsel for the nonpartisan Colorado Ethics Watch and principal of her own public policy and democracy education firm and governmental and nonprofit clients. In 2017, Peg was named one of the top women attorneys by Law Week Colorado. Prior to moving to Colorado in 2010, Peg held public service positions as nonprofit counsel, nonpartisan counsel to the United States House of Representatives Ethics Committee and as a policy attorney with the Federal Election Commission. She grew up in Phoenix, Arizona, earned a JD from Georgetown University Law and a BA from Arizona State University. Peg lives in Denver with her husband, who's also a local government public servant, their 2 teenagers, and many rescue pets. Peg, the floor is all yours. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Jeff. And thank you everyone else for having me here. I'm happy to talk with you all and more importantly, be able to answer your questions, hopefully here as we are talking about all the different things that you can do in Massachusetts. I understand you've done some items last year because of the circumstances that we were in. And maybe this makes it an interesting time to be able to make some of those items permanent now that you've gotten a taste of what it works out for you and for your voters. As Jeff was saying, in Colorado, we did a number of things over the last couple of decades, but really the big thing that happened was in 2013, we enacted the Voter Access and Modernized Elections Act, which was created basically what we were calling the Colorado model or the all options voting. So this was our combination of mail-in ballots and early person and in-person voting, same-day registration, and some other registration fixes in terms of security and access to voter registration. A lot of those pieces that came together. And ever since 2013, you know, we've been tweaking and adjusting as need be, as things happen and as we've continued to grow the system. So some topics that we're not going to get into today, things like expanding pre-registration down to 16-year-olds and some of those items we've been working on ever since 2013. But we've been through a number of election cycles now with this model and by and large kept it intact. We did do a bit of adjusting in 2019 to some of our formulas of how many vote centers, how many days for this and that. But we've been through a number of presidential cycles with this system at this point. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to combine kind of the first 2 little topics so we can talk about them and then answer questions about mail-in voting and early in-person voting. So just kind of how we can vote here in Colorado. So as I said, we have a combination process here where we in Colorado mail out mail ballots to all registered voters and active registered voters 22 days before an election. And voters have the option of either mailing those back, returning them in a secure drop box, or at an early vote center, or doing in-person voting at early vote centers. At this point in 2020, the vast majority of our voters do choose to use our mail ballot. So for example, in Arapahoe County, where I work, which is, if you're familiar at all with Colorado or even just know the rectangle on a map, which we are, it's like a Zoom square, right? We are the county just south of Denver. So we're the one right next to Denver. We had in 2020 November, 93.6% of our voters used their mail ballot as opposed to voting in person. So that might have been returned in a couple different ways. 90% of those folks returned them in one of our secured drop boxes, our 24-hour drop boxes. We have them at various places throughout the county buildings, city buildings, things like that, libraries. 7.5% returned them back to us by US mail, and another 2.5%, the last bit, basically returned them by coming to a vote center and putting them into kind of a manned drop box where someone was watching at the vote center. So that's really means we only had about 6.5% of all of our voters, which in Arapahoe County was 356,000 votes counted last November, who voted in person, either early or on election day. So this number has grown over time since 2013. We didn't start at that. But when we did start, back in 2013, and we started this process of sending a ballot to everybody, we had before that, though, for a number of cycles, permanent absentee list or permanent mail-in voting list, which is what I understand the Votes Act is going to do. And so we had 70% of our voters had chosen to be on that list by the time we got to making our final step of this other type of reform that we were going to proactively send them out. So when we provided the option for that sort of permanent mail-in list, 70% of Coloradans statewide did choose to do that. So it was definitely a popular option. People found it useful. And from the clerk's perspective, in the clerk's offices, we run things at the county clerk level. It was very useful because it's a predictable sense of, we know how many people in general, if you're on a permanent list, we know how many ballots that means we're going to be sending out each election, as opposed to having applications come in and out every single election, and it's a lot of extra paperwork. It also has been very predictable for the flow of those coming back. One of the things that we're allowed to do is we are allowed to start tabulating those ballots 15 days before election day as they come back through the drop box or through any of those other locations. So it really takes the pressure off of election day and the day after election day, because we are able to be doing the processing during those 2 weeks as things trickle back in. So that is the overall a very useful system that all of us in the clerk's offices in Colorado really like. Early in-person is similar in the sense that in a general election, we have 15 days of early voting. And again, every day that those ballots are cast, we could start the reconciliation and tabulation the next day on a rolling basis, because we are allowed to do that processing 15 days before election day. We have no idea. We have no running totals. We have no idea who's winning. We don't push the button, but we are allowed to verify signatures. We're allowed to start going through our process, everything we do with our bipartisan election judges. So it is really able to keep that rolling for a couple of weeks and take the pressure off of election day. In the smaller elections like primaries and coordinated elections, it's an 8-day window for early in-person in Colorado. And we have all of these are paper ballots. And so that it sets up for the risk limiting audit, which I know we'll talk about later, whether you're in person or the mail ballot. We do have accessible tablets at our in-person vote centers, but they print out a paper ballot. So that's how all of it can still come together later for the risk limiting audit. And so all of those things really mean that we're looking at from around Columbus Day through election day is very active election time. People are getting ballots, people are voting, people are sending them back, and the clerk's office are allowed to start processing those as well, back and forth. And because it spreads it all out, it also means that we don't have a big crush of applications or absentee applications and things like that right around Labor Day or whatever a deadline would be that just slams our office to have to deal with it to get things out. And then we are allowed to roll with it as they come back in. So I want to make sure we do some questions on kind of that general, just how we vote with those options.
And Peg, thank you. If folks do have questions, please feel free to raise your hand and we'll call on you to unmute.
I have a quick question on how do people who are visually impaired use your mail-in ballots?
Oh, great question, Nancy. So we have at the Secretary of State's office, they've adapted our system that we use for our military and overseas voters, which is a ballot delivery system through the computer where you log into a secure portal to get a blank ballot, which then you can mark using whatever sort of assisted device you have on your computer that allows it. Maybe it's an audio, reading it aloud type of device, whatever type of thing normally would work on that person's computer to make the computer work accessible for them. And then it prints out, then you can print it out. And you would send it back just like a mail ballot using your envelope that you got with your mail ballot. But we do have the option for accessibility to be able to log into that system. And that's something our Secretary of State's office developed over the last, that's one of those things I said between 2013 and now that we sort of tweaked along the way. That's one of those tweaks that we've had for the last just couple elections. I think there's a question here in the chat. So was the COVID elections using this process audited independently to demonstrate integrity? Yes. So we have risk limiting audits, and we have a number of testing and audits that we do before and after every election. So last year in Colorado, it was a 3-election year for us, which I understand you guys had in Massachusetts as well. We had some Super Tuesday, we had a state primary, we had November. So for each one of those, we have public testing of our voting systems before the election, which is run by bipartisan representatives from each of the parties and open to the public. Some of them are live streamed, things like that. And then after each election, we have the risk limiting audit and the canvassing and all of those, which are again done by bipartisan teams and representatives from the parties, open to the public and live streams. So we went through all of those processes with every single one of those elections last year and didn't have any discrepancies or indications of any problems with any of those elections. Those are all done at every single county. So when we talk about like the risk limiting audits and things, every single county does that. And we do them for some statewide issues as contests as well as local contests. So it's sort of a 2-tier system and it's done in every single county, not just picking and choosing. And we didn't have any discrepancies or issues in any of those.
Okay. I think we can go to same day registration, Meg.
Great. Yeah. So registration. We have in Colorado, we have a statewide voter database, which has an online portal that folks can use. But every county and the county clerk is in charge for updates and maintenance and the voter rolls within those counties. And so if you have a voter registration form or any of that type of stuff, it does go through the counties. So same day registration all the way up through election day is actually something that the clerk's offices are very, very happy to have at this point and very much in favor of keeping and expanding because it's administratively much easier than the flood of voter registration forms we used to get from voter registration drives that all came in before this like 22-day deadline. And then we had a blackout period where nobody could register to vote. And then you would maybe have, you know, folks who would show up who would have like one day where they could do something. And it was kind of the paperwork was really crazy. What we have now is the same day registration just goes seamlessly all the way through. So we have no blackout periods at all. And it just kind of cycles through our system. And the only thing that we have that's sort of a blackout period, like I said, is that we mail out ballots. And so we stop mailing out ballots to people 8 days before the election because otherwise that would be too late. It wouldn't get to you in time, things like that. So if you register, you can still register or update your address. But we tell you, you have to come to a vote center or come and get a ballot. We won't actually send it in the mail to you because we don't want it to be lost or just not get to you in time. So mostly what happens is the folks who come to our vote centers or are doing same day registration in those last like 8 days coming in during early voting, these are just people who maybe moved and forgot to update their voter registration address because they hadn't gotten around to updating their driver's license yet. We do have automatic back-end updating with the driver's licenses, but not everybody driver's license updates right away, right after they move either. So there might be a little window there. Or it's folks who honestly just need a, spoiled their ballot or something and need to come in and get another one. But in terms of the registration, less likely as are they brand new registrations. It's usually there's something that's just a little off. Sometimes we get people who come in because they got their ballot in the mail and they realize, oh, I never told you that I got married and changed my last name. And so they don't want to end up voting a ballot that has the wrong last name. They can change that on the spot. We're using same day registration with the right documentation and the right ID, whereas otherwise they wouldn't have been able to vote because you're right, it wouldn't match. And so that's something that we see a lot of times there. We do require IDs coming in to do the same day registration. In Colorado, it's not necessarily a photo ID. Some of them are, like if you use your driver's license or your student ID from a Colorado university, usually has a picture on it, but some of them are not photo IDs. There's a list of about 10 IDs that are allowed, and some are not photos. But you do need an ID to come in, register, and vote the same day for same day registration. But it's pretty seamless in terms of how it works. It's not much extra work at the vote center itself, and it doesn't create much of a backlog for processing at the time or create a bunch of lines or anything like that. And overall, it makes it a lot easier than the stacks of paperwork that come all in a rush at the end and then having to explain to people on the phone, nope, you missed the window, sorry, you can't vote. Which actually happened to me when I first moved to Colorado in 2010. I couldn't vote in my first election in 2010, me, an elections person, because I moved and I updated my driver's license, but I was like 2 days short or 2 days past when the window was before the primary, the state primary, it just so happened. So I wasn't allowed to vote.
Let's see if we have any questions on the topic of same day registration. General questions at the end, but right now on this topic.
Yes, I have a question. To follow up, Nancy brought up the subject of the impaired voter, and you said that also the overseas voters were using this system. If you could tell us what the system is and maybe send an email with the specifics of it, we would like to know more about that.
Okay, yeah, it's a secure ballot portal that our Secretary of State's office has developed. It's on their website. So I don't think you can get to the front page of it, but you can't log into it without having
who is the vendor? Who is the vendor of this?
They work with Democracy Live.
Okay, if you could send us an email with that. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Again, questions on same day voter registration. Seeing none. Onward, Peg.
I think this next one will be quick on my end, and I just want to answer questions. So jail-based voting. We have a requirement in Colorado that the clerk has to coordinate with our sheriffs, our county sheriffs, to make sure that anyone in the county jail or detention facility, we facilitate voter registration and voting for them. Most folks in our county jail are eligible to vote just because they're either being held pretrial or for certain types of misdemeanors where you only have a loss of your right to vote during felony incarceration in Colorado. So the county jail doesn't have those folks. So we have to file an election plan before every election with the Secretary of State that details out the process that we would use to do this with the sheriff. I'll give you, so it's varies slightly from county to county, but I'll tell you, like Arapahoe County's version is relatively standard. So we work with the county sheriff so that voter registration forms can be sent to us directly in the county clerk's office by email. So a confined voter would be able to fill out that form and give it to a contact inside. They would then be scanning and emailing them to us where we process the voter registration forms. And then when we mail out our mail ballots, they do have a mailing address for those folks. So they would get their ballot at the jail itself. Then we deliver a secure locked ballot box, normal like we would have at a library or other types of places, that is watched over by, again, these contacts at the sheriff's office. And then they can put their ballots in those, and then we come pick them up the day before election day usually. So they're in there for about a week or two for people to be able to vote and put them in. And we're actually working with the sheriff this year to pilot a 1-day on final election day in-person voting that we might set up a tablet and be in there in person, just for folks who maybe are intake at the very last moment, maybe that last weekend or something, who we miss, who didn't get a ballot delivered to them, just as a final backstop measure on that final election day. But that's fairly similar to what a lot of, not the in-person part, but the ballots back and forth and the voter registration forms is similar to what most other counties do.
Thank you. So are there any questions for Peg on this topic, on the jail-based voting? Raise hand or in the chat.
And overall, our sheriffs have been great to work with. Our sheriffs and our clerks are both elected officials at the county level, so they tend to work together fairly well.
So not seeing any, on to risk limiting audits.
Sure. As I already mentioned, we do these after every election. Basically, our risk limiting audits are overseen by the Secretary of State's office. So the Secretary of State will set the risk tolerance for the particular election. And they will choose both statewide contests, like maybe a US Senate race or a governor's race, as well as assign 1 or 2 local contests in each county, which will be the ones that will be audited and tested. We have an 8-day cure period after election day in Colorado where people can fix their signatures and cure their ballots. So we have 8 days to cure. Then day 9, we have to turn in our cast vote record and our unofficial results. The risk limiting audit happens on day 10. So it happens pretty much right away. The Secretary of State's office gives us the particular information that we need from the randomly generated seed. They roll a bunch of 10-sided dice to generate the random number and put it into the computer program that they use. And it makes us pull specific paper ballots out from different batches in different places. And so we're doing all of this on like day 10. They give us a list and say, here's what you need to do. In November, for example, the first list we got, we had to pull, 250 ballots from totally random places in our batches. And so then we have bipartisan teams. We just take a couple of our supervisor election judges who we've worked with through the whole tabulation process and bring them back for 1 day. And we get it all done within a couple of hours. We're pulling the ballots. People work in bipartisan teams to basically look at the ballot and as a hand count say, this is what these 4 whatever races are that we're auditing. These were the results. We enter those hand results into the software, and then the software compares what we said those results were to what the tabulation said those results were. All of those go to the Secretary of State's office, who is the one who looks to see if there are discrepancies, if there's problems in one county or in the state. We could go to a second round audit, and then either statewide. In November, we did a statewide second round audit just to be extra sure. And then sometimes you just do a second round audit in a certain county because of something. And the Colorado Secretary of State's website has an audit center on its website where all of these audit reports live. They do an explanation of every single discrepancy, everything. It's all out there for transparency purposes. You can go back to prior elections and it's all there. And so that's how we do it in Colorado. And we've been doing it for a number of election cycles now. And it works really well. A normal election, it only takes a couple of hours. Last November, it was a little longer. But it's actually something we really like as clerks. Every county does it, but we think it is good check on the process, and we explain it to our voters all the time. A lot of us do little videos or other kinds of explainers to our voters about it because we do think it's a very good check on the process.
Thank you. Questions on risk limiting audits? Anybody see any? Raising hands in the chat? If not, the next topic is back-end automatic voter registration.
Okay, so we had for a number of years motor voter registration, obviously, like everybody did for a while there in the driver's licenses. And then we had sort of the opt-in type of front-end voter registration where we played with a couple different scripts at different times at the motor vehicle department, whether they would say, we're going to register you to vote now, okay? Versus as long as are you okay with me registering you to vote now? Like, depending on how you script it. And what we know, and most of the counties all know this, in our county, clerks are the ones who run the motor vehicle departments in most counties, by the way, in Colorado. So it's a different division and department, but it's the same elected official. And we found that depending on how you phrase the question, people are more likely to say no because they just want to go home and they think it's going to take a long time, and it really doesn't take a long time, but it's just a perception thing. So we officially we phased it in, but as of last year, we are in more of the opt-out back-end AVR. And the way we do it in Colorado is the software, it takes care of updating, sending a record over to our voter registration system when you update your address or your name or something like that with your driver's license. And then the voter registration side of the house, so elections, will send a letter by mail to the voter within 7 days that gives them the option to either decline voter registration and say, nope, I don't want to register, or to affiliate with a political party. Because with us, automatic voter registration means you are registered as unaffiliated, which in Colorado, you can still vote in primaries and everything as an unaffiliated. So if you get this letter and do nothing, you just stay registered as unaffiliated. But you can send the letter back. It's a form with check boxes to either affiliate and pick a political party or to decline voter registration. Or if you don't want to use the form, it tells you on the letter, you can also just go to our online voter registration portal, which is Go Vote Colorado, and do the affiliation as well there, or withdraw if you want to there. And we haven't really seen any problem with it at all. We are just working out a little bit in terms of the wording of the letter, back feedback as we see people. But in terms of workload and everything, it's been great in that we've reduced the number, I think. We've seen a slow reduction in the number of undeliverable ballots because our ballots are not forwardable, so they get bounced back to us. And so that address change is starting to show up and to make a difference there, because you don't have to wait for people to remember to do things as much sometimes.
Thank you. Are any questions on the back-end automatic voter registration issue? In the chat or raise your hand. Does anyone see any?
Okay.
Moving right. Whoops. The next and last topic is ERIC, which is the Election Registration Information Center.
Great. And this goes, perfectly with what I was just saying there, because in Colorado, and I'm sure it's probably the case with your folks who are sending out the ballots at the municipal level, if we send a ballot to somebody and it gets bounced as undeliverable because that person is moved, but the address isn't updated, we actually have to pay that return postage that comes back. So it costs us money to have bad addresses on our list. So we don't want bad addresses on our list. That's not our goal. We have to actually pay. So ERIC is one of those other ways that we try to make sure we have the best possible list whenever we're sending out those ballots, even if the individual people either forget or, life happens and they just can't get it changed in time. So Colorado was one of the original 7 states who helped found ERIC. So we've been doing it since the beginning. And it's been really helpful because it gets you this information from the post office, sort of that national change of address information. It gets you information from the Social Security office. It's very reliable information when people either names change or addresses change or someone dies, things like that. And that way we can kind of fold that in with the information we get from the DMV and other places. We get a report monthly, basically, out of this ERIC program that gives us kind of these updates on folks. And we can be able to update it within our records on a rolling basis all year round. And it allows us to be able to do that and keep our rolls as up to date as possible, which also means if you're in a pandemic and you need to all of a sudden send postcards to people to tell people, hey, we're going to have to do things a little differently this year at the vote centers. Again, hopefully your list is super up to date, even though they maybe haven't gotten around to changing something themselves. And I think one of the things that's really important with voter registration to remember is we talk to a lot of folks, a lot of voters who don't understand. And I'm sure, senators and representatives, you talk to constituents all the time. I know I've worked for Congress and everything. They don't understand that just, government agencies aren't already talking to each other. So if a voter changes their address with the post office, or they change their address with the DMV or someplace, they don't understand why that doesn't mean it's now been updated with voter registration. It's been updated everywhere else. Like, I told the government this already. Shouldn't you guys have this coordinated amongst yourselves already? Because I already told you that. So ERIC is one of those ways where if the voter has already done something and told 3 other government agencies, they don't necessarily have to tell a 4th. And we can kind of combine that information. And it also allows us to cross-check information very easily between if there's a typo or something like that. It's just a quality control measure that we find incredibly useful and incredibly helpful. And so it's something that, like I said, we get these reports monthly and it just kind of adds in to everything else we do.
Thank you. And I think we will take ERIC questions, but move into the 15-minute or so general question period. And I think Patty was going to moderate that, or Jeff, somebody. But 15 minutes, questions, go.
So I just real quick, while you all think of questions, I want to just highlight risk limiting audits, which is really would be a great improvement to how Massachusetts does post-election audits. And I think, Director Pearl did a great job talking about how Colorado does it. The real simple version is risk limiting audits means that we would set a certain standard for confidence in the results that are seen between the machines and how they tabulate and the in-person viewing of those ballots. And so right now in Massachusetts, we just say we're going to do 3% random audits of precincts across the Commonwealth and report on it. What a risk limiting audit will do is say, we're going to do that, but we're going to continue to increase the amount of ballots that we're going to look at until we see that we're over a certain, we'll say 95% confidence that these are accurate. And so what we know is risk limiting audits are really a national gold standard for post-election audits. 2 states made it really famous last fall, and that was Pennsylvania and Georgia. And we think that if there's room for improvement in Massachusetts, that we deserve the best. So that's why risk limiting audits are included in the VOTES Act as well. So with that, I hope you now have questions. I'll turn it over to Patty.
I'm surprised that there are no questions, so don't be shy, everybody.
And real quick, just want to recognize Rep. Owens. Thank you for joining us. It's good to have you here. Welcome.
I think no questions just means the VOTES Act is going to sail through.
I think there was a question in the chat about clerk's response, and I don't know if David, do you want to mention something about the clerks or Janet?
Well, I think, and by the way, Peg, thank you so much for that just really incredible volume of information. So helpful to all of us, even those of us whose heads are in this all the time. I just wanted to note, if Jeff didn't earlier, that when we worked with Rep. Lana and Senator Cream to draft this bill, we definitely consulted with clerks to find out, what are things that might make this streamline for you? Because obviously, the more that people vote, the more work there is. I mean, that's just, common sense. That said, we, I think, are the last state or one of the few last states to have a checkout table. So there has to be 2 tables set up at the in-person voting, which is, doubles the work. So in our bill, we completely eliminate the checkout tables. And Jeff, is that correct that we're the last state that has that?
If not, we're tied.
Yeah. And then through some of the provisions that Peg talked about, like getting ERIC fully implemented, clerks will have a lot more updated information, that right now they're just bogged down with some of the things that could be eliminated by having ERIC implemented with the e-poll books and other provisions. So I just wanted to kind of put that footnote in there that we did this very mindful of the operational life of clerks and voting.
So we do have a couple questions in the chat now, if we'll go ahead with those. So Lauren from Leader Balzer's office is asking, Peg, what are some examples of non-photo IDs that can be used for same-day voter registration?
Okay, yeah, great. So any of the voter registration, you need to have, if you don't have a Colorado driver's license, you would include your last 4 digits of your social security number. So a social security number, and then one of the other IDs, which would be things like we have a utility bill that has the address that you're registering at in Colorado is an example of one that's a non-photo one, for example. That's probably the most common non-photo one that people use is a utility bill that includes the address in the where you're registering at. So that lists that one. And then a couple of them also are government documents that are similar to that. Tying into the jail-based voting, one of the IDs for folks who are registering to vote from jail is actually we have a letter from the Department of Corrections or from the sheriff basically saying you are incarcerated and you are in this particular jail at this time. Like that counts as your ID because folks don't necessarily have other IDs when they're in jail, for example. So that's a not photo ID.
Great, and there's a question from Carolyn Sherrard. She said, sorry she missed this, but do you send mail ballots for primary elections? And if so, how do you handle unenrolled voters?
We do send mail ballots to primary elections as well. And if unenrolled, if you mean like unaffiliated with a political party, the way we handle them in Colorado is actually the two major political parties. You can choose as an unaffiliated voter to only receive one ballot if you want. If you say I'm unaffiliated, but I want the Republican ballot, like a preference in a primary, you can. Or we send you both the Republican ballot and the Democratic ballot with a really big flyer inside that literally has a stop sign on it that says vote only one or neither counts. And so we've worked out the language over time that works, but that allows them to choose. That's been the law since 2018, and they have to pick one or the other. You can't go back and forth.
Great. Let's see. Karen from Rep. Hendrick's office is asking if we can do a comparison with the Votes Act versus the Colorado provisions. Jeff, is that something you think we might be able to get to staff? Okay, great. Let's see. Peg, so in terms of incarcerated voters and coordinating with the Department of Correction, how have you seen access to election and voter information for incarcerated voters?
Yeah, so that's actually part of the election plan and part of the rules of what we have to do as well. So for example, we have a book that includes all the information about ballot measures. And our job is we have to get some of those books into the jail. We have to deliver some of those voter information books to them as well. So we don't necessarily have to deliver candidate paraphernalia to them, but we do have to give them kind of the official voter information guides, either from the county or from the state. We deliver those in. And then usually we have our website, which is arapahovotes.com. If they have access to that website, which usually they do, we have links on there for where you can go to get lists of candidates, just the same way we provide it to other folks.
Okay, great. A question about poll workers. Could you speak to training for poll workers to support the town clerks, and if there would be funding for that, and is there funding and or training in Colorado? So I think they're asking about Massachusetts, and then what's the story in Colorado?
Well, I can talk for Colorado. So we have we are required to have bipartisan clerks. A lot of our work is done in teams and bipartisan teams. So signature verification is one Republican and one Democrat working as a team, things like that, all along the way. And we do training, a combination of online training, especially after last year, and some in-person training. And then the way payment is set up in Colorado is a little weird, I guess. Well, I shouldn't say weird because I don't know how you do yours, so whatever. But we get reimbursed, the counties get reimbursed 80 cents per registered voter for kind of the costs of statewide elections. And that kind of is supposed to cover everything, but it doesn't cover everything. We all know it doesn't cover everything, but it's sort of a cost sharing type of thing. So that's how kind of we get that. We also have cities and things who add their municipal elections to our ballots, and then they kick in a little bit towards the cost for things like election judges and operating the poll locations and things like that as well. But the training would all just be kind of wrapped into that general budget. We pay just hourly for training and for working for our bipartisan judges. We don't in Colorado have volunteers. We do pay all of our election judges.
Let's see, Kayla from Rep. Kushmerik's office is asking, is there a way to ensure that younger people, in other words, people who just turned 18, have more accessibility to register to vote?
So in Colorado, what we do is we have a number of things. I mentioned, first of all, we have pre-registration starting at age 16. So when you get your driver's license now with automatic voter registration back end at 16, you actually are pre-registered to vote. So you get put on the rolls in a confidential status. You don't have any ballots sent to you. You can't show up and vote until you turn 18, in which case then your registration flips in the system. And then you are eligible to show up and vote or get a mail ballot at that point. So that already has started. That happened a couple cycles ago, and that is starting to come to fruition now with that first group of 16-year-olds in 2020 turning 18. We also, in the most recent tweak in 2019, we changed the law to encourage drop boxes, mail ballot drop boxes on college campuses. The online voter registration is huge with everyone who's younger as well. We basically go into high schools and just make everyone take out their phone, and we have them register to vote in about 2 minutes because that's how you can do it. So online voter registration to me is pretty much what they want to do.
So we also passed pre-registration and online in 2014. So that is something
Great.
that Massachusetts has been doing since 2015. So a long time ago.
And for most of you in the building who were here in 2018, in the civic education law that the legislature passed and the governor signed, also included that the Secretary of State would create a statewide challenge for high schools across the Commonwealth to do voter registration drives. I'm not sure the status of that, but I know that that dovetails really nicely. You know, we want to reduce barriers to voting and have more people vote. And I think it's a great next step after what you all did in 2018 to make sure our young and new voters are engaged and informed.
We had good experience also with getting a lot of 18-year-olds and 19-year-olds working as election judges last fall because so many of the colleges were on remote only. so they didn't have to go to class and they could come help us out. And it got them a little more into the process, as well as giving us more bipartisan folks to pick from who weren't as health sensitive to what was going on last fall.
So just being mindful of the time, it's just about 1 o'clock. And so Jeff, I wanted to leave any time for Senator Cream or Representative Lon or anybody else to say some final remarks.
I just have one thing. This was great. This was very helpful. And
Nice.
I'm looking forward to the hearing, and I'm looking forward to voting it. So I think this is great. Thank you all for coming, and whatever information we need to put out, I know that Jeff will do that. But I think this is a great bill, and I'm proud that I'm a lead sponsor with Representative Lon.
Thank you, Senator Cream, and thank you all for being here. Jeff for putting this together, and Pam for that, Peg for that great overview of how it's working in Colorado. It's very helpful. As many know, I was the chair of election laws in 2020, which turned into be a very busy year in pulling off the vote by mail elections this year, and it was a team effort. I must give a shout out to Pam Wilmot for all her work. I worked with her. I probably spoke to her 5 times a day for over 2 months trying to work together. And I think with our clerks, with the Secretary of State, with our colleagues, Senator Feingold, and I know Representative Dan Ryan, who's the new chair of election laws, who's on the call, but to step off is a great guy who's excited to be in this role. It really is an important role to bring access to voters all across the Commonwealth. We certainly know we have a lot of work to do, though, and in terms of even voter education, because we have so many people who just don't understand how our elections work, which creates an awful divisive environment. So we've got to do so much there in terms of voter education. But I'm excited for this bill. I'm excited to work with Senator Cream on it, and all of you. And I just want to thank you for being here today, but look forward to working with you this session to get this passed. So thank you all.
Thanks again so much. Thank you, Chair Lon. Thank you, Majority Leader Cream. Thank you to all the members and staff for turning out today. We know that the legislature just took a great step to extend some of these expansions for mail-in and early voting through the end of June. But we really are looking at the urgency around this fall. We know we have many municipal elections, and some of these ideas that we think are not just great now for the time we're in, but great for the Commonwealth, especially when the whole country is watching some states move in the total wrong direction. It brings me great joy to say, hey, look at Massachusetts. Look what we're doing. We're not missing this moment. I'm a little bit bummed that we didn't get the All-Star game moved to Fenway, but hey, maybe we can still make national news with the passage of the Votes Act. And all of us on the call are really committed to being a resource to the full membership. So I'll put my email in the chat. Thank you so much, Director Pearl. We really appreciate your time. If anybody has ideas or wants to follow up and talk more about this, please reach out and we're happy to connect you to Peg. Thanks again, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you.